just up the road, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets in 2024, they went 7-6, just like they did in 2023. It was Brent Key's second full season at Georgia Tech. We all remember that he took over late in the season for Geoff Collins a few years ago. They didn't finish ranked again, but I ended up watching a good bit of Georgia Tech this year because they had big games that were on nationally. They played in week 0 against Florida State over there in Ireland. Obviously, the Georgia game. I saw a lot of the upset of Miami. So ended up seeing a lot of Georgia Tech this year, and they were really, really an improved team who was really, really tough.
Very tough team. Very tough.
Yeah, and you can finally see that they are getting past the years where they were so talent depleted. They were still feeling the residuals of the Paul Johnson triple option years and the Jeff Collins 404, the culture years, that really left Georgia Tech with not that many good football players. But this year you kind of have finally seen some players that are like, hey, those guys are good, and Tech's finally getting back to a little bit more of what they used to be, which was a very, very solid ACC football team. The year started out great for them. Like I said, winning that week 0 game on national television against Florida State, who nobody knew what Florida State was going to become at that point, was a good way for them to start the season. It put them on display for the country to see and let people notice, hey, they've got something going here with Haynes King at quarterback.
I would say that this Tech team was easy to root for nationally because they played really tough. And that was epitomized by Haynes King. He was an absolute warrior on the field and took tons of damage throughout the season, just laying it all on the line.
They'd finally gotten into the top 25 early in the year, but they suffered losses to Syracuse and Louisville, and they never recovered to get back into the top 25 after that. But then, of course, we got to the Miami game. Miami came into that game number 4, number 5 in the rankings, and they beat them 28-23. And they really showed some balance at the quarterback position in that game. Haynes King was really banged up and really couldn't throw the ball. And so you saw them switch the quarterbacks between him and Aaron Philo, and they were able to move the ball. Miami, couldn't really answer what they were doing, and it led to arguably one of the biggest upsets of the season. And really put on display their star receiver, Eric Singleton, who ended up being one of the best receivers in the country and ended up being like the top-rated transfer prospect to the transfer portal this season. So good luck at Auburn, Singleton. But at the end of the year, obviously for Georgia Tech, they always put a lot into the Georgia game. That Georgia has really owned that rivalry for a long time. And even though they ended up losing that game in 8 overtimes, I would say that might have been Tech's best game of the season.
Oh, by far. They had that game dominated until 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter.
It wasn't just that they were winning. They whipped Georgia physically, and they outcoached Georgia in that game as well. Haynes King was a god in that game.
Yes.
Like, there was nothing he could do wrong. He could run the ball. He could pass the ball. He was making everything. And unfortunately, that ended up biting them at the end because when they did get to overtime, he was just out of gas.
Yeah. And I think it's really cool with these coaches that we have at Georgia and Georgia Tech. They both played at their respective schools, and they grew up as fans of those schools. So it means a lot to these guys. I mean, you saw in the press conference after the game,
Brent Key was wiped, man.
Yeah, Brent Key was, he was distraught. Like, you could tell that he couldn't believe what just happened. The Tech should have won that game. They absolutely should have won that game.
They really should have. They outplayed Georgia, and It was one Dan Jackson hit and freezing cold weather that helped Georgia get the win in the end. But
that was the most stressful game I've ever watched as a Georgia fan.
Absolutely. And the season after that, they had a good bowl game against Vanderbilt. It was kind of the battle of the nerds, and Vanderbilt beat them. They both showed up to play, and so that kind of left a little bit of a sour taste on what was a really good year for Tech. I think 8-5 would have sounded really good for Tech this year. Because they were 7-6 last year.
Maybe if they still had Singleton, it's different, but who knows?
Yeah, they did improve their record from the year before, but I really felt like they were a much better team than they have been in years. So for that, I gave Georgia Tech a grade of a B.
Yeah, it was a season of ups and downs. Like you said, they didn't improve their record from the year before. There were probably some other games in there that they should have won. But overall, I think it was a much improved, talent-wise team, physical, hard-nosed, gritty. And just because I hate Tech, I'm going to give them a B-.
Yeah, here's a funny thing is if they would have hung on to win that Georgia game, they would have had 3 wins over top 10 teams on the season.
Yeah,
because Florida was a top 10 team when they played them. They obviously beat Miami, and then they almost beat Georgia. So
if they beat Georgia, I would have probably given them an A for the season. I'd give them a rare A.
I think most of their fans would have as well.
So their grade for their record being that they had a winning season and they were bowl eligible, they get a B- for that.
All right. So with that being said, their final grade in 2024 from the Nitro Show, the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets get a B-.
Yes.
Which is a lot lower than what they usually get on their report cards.
True. Absolutely true. Great school.